This case started as a kidnapping. Police were called here to the scene at about 6 a.m. the morning after Christmas. Someone inside this house had made a 911 call saying that little JonBenet had been kidnapped. Well, when police got here, they went inside the house, and a short time later, they found the little girl's body.
Well, yes, if a short time later is 7 hours later. Also, Patsy never mentioned JonBenet's name in the 911 call. Think about that. She didn't actually identify JonBenet by name. So how do the police look for her? And of course, nowhere in the ransom note does it mention JonBenet's name either.
The parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, were home at the time, but detectives say the parents are not suspects.
Well, it's interesting if you think about the narrative today, that as early as December 1996, the media was already, in a sense, excluding JonBenet's parents as suspects based on what the police apparently told them. So much for focusing unfairly on the Ramseys. Also interesting, especially in terms of this first report, is what they initially reported about Burke, whom they don't specifically or explicitly name here.
The father is the president of Access Graphics, located on Boulder's Pearl Street Mall. The couple does have another child, a son around 10 years old. Whether the boy is a suspect, investigators won't comment.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. We're going to deal with 5 unpleasant surprises, 5 what the F's you probably didn't know about regarding the coroner, Dr. John Mayer. We're going to deal with that in some detail. We're going to drill down into what he saw. It's another doctor. It's kind of a counterpart in a way to Dr. Booth. So Dr. Mayer arrives at the scene. What did he see? What didn't he see? What did he do? But also what didn't he do? But first, we are at the end of another month covering this case. I think it's the 3rd month in a row. And I'd just like to see a show of hands who is interested in the series continuing. Thank you very much to the many of you who have subscribed and who have participated in this whole process, discovering this case in a way all over again. I can't really see it going on for much longer, but with your support, who knows, perhaps we can push it for another week. If you are interested in that, please hit the thanks button. Also, if you have any questions you'd like me to deal with in a special Q&A, let me know about that in the comments. I'd like to bookend this analysis with a sort of live Q&A at some point. I'll also be following this analysis today with ongoing coverage of the doomed van life couple, Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie. Yesterday I did a little report from the road, some footage of me just talking on camera about what I thought, and I think that context is also quite interesting. Remember, there's also a Netflix series out there on this case called American Murder, Gabby Petito. I do recommend you watch it. So look out for that, and look out for my next episode on this case titled Love is Blind. Right, and let's get started. So we're going to deal with 5 what the F's you probably didn't know about regarding the coroner, Dr. John Mayer. If you've got your notebooks out there, please let me know how many of these you did know about. Number 1, coroner arrived 7 hours after JonBenet's body was discovered in the basement. And this is actually the first full 9 News story on JonBenet Ramsey's death. You're actually seeing footage of the scene that night.
Past Santa Claus in his sleigh and a double row of candy canes, deputy coroners brought the body of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey from her upscale home. Neighbors described the young girl as beautiful and polite. In 1995, she won the Little Miss Colorado pageant.
So what happened moments before this footage was filmed and minutes earlier? Well, it's really quite astonishing. While Dr. Booth was with the Ramseys, giving Patsy Valium and going for a walk with John, this was at the Fernie's home. Another doctor, Dr. John Mayer, who was the coroner in this case, finally arrived. He arrived at the Ramsey home. And so Linda Arndt wrote this report regarding this moment. The Boulder County coroner, Dr. John Mayer, so that's a bit of a misspelling there, was the first person to enter the Ramsey residence after the search warrant had been obtained, and we really want to look at that search warrant as well. Arndt writes, Dr. Mayer entered the Ramsey residence at about 23 hours. That's quite accurate. 23 minutes past 8. Dr. Mayer entered through the front door. Dr. Mayer placed protective booties on each of his feet before he entered the residence. Dr. Mayer also covered his hands with plastic gloves before entering the residence. All good and well. Dr. Mayer was told the location of JonBenet's body. Now, at this point, she was actually lying under the Christmas tree on the carpet in the lounge. That is not obviously where she was found. Arndt then writes, Dr. Mayer exited the residence through the front door. So it just seems like he came in through the front door, went to JonBenet, spent some time there, and then left the same way. Did he go anywhere else inside the home? Dr. Mayer told me that he had examined JonBenet's body. Dr. Mayer pronounced JonBenet dead. Dr. Mayer told me he had observed ligature marks to JonBenet's neck. There's no mention here about the ligatures on her one hand. Dr. Mayer had noted petechial hemorrhages to JonBenet's eyes. Based on my training and experience, it is my experience that petechial hemorrhage, and it's cut off here, but I think she was probably saying is an indication of asphyxia. Now think about it, JonBenet died likely between midnight and 2 a.m., and the coroner only arrives after 8 p.m. That's almost 24 hours later, 18 hours later and around 17 hours after her body was discovered, the coroner arrived. Now, we've heard about the Boulder PD being blamed. You don't really hear any finger wagging in this area. And of course, it was Christmas. People were far afield and they had to be brought in. Anyway, number 2, coroner spent 10 minutes at the crime scene. So on the one hand, I think you can say, well, he did arrive quite late, and maybe there are reasons for that, but I'm not sure if you can explain away the 10 minutes at the crime scene. I mean, can you believe it? 10 minutes at this crime scene. Now, I know in the Amanda Knox case, the coroner arrived and waited for hours outside the crime scene. Here, I think they were waiting for the coroner to arrive. In that case, I think his name was Lally. He was really impatiently waiting for them to let him in. And as a result of this delay and this waiting, Meredith's bra clasp was lost, and a clasp that contained Amanda Knox's boyfriend's DNA was on it, a clasp that was cut with a knife. And this was a crucial aspect to the case that the coroner likely would have found if he had been allowed at the scene to begin with. In hindsight, it's not hard to see how a 10-minute inspection might miss something, and in this case, the coroner missed quite a bit to begin with. Can you think what those two things are that he missed? Number 3, coroner assumed death by ligature strangulation. Quite easily done. It's a simple and straightforward case.
They are investigating her death as a homicide. So far, no arrests have been made.
In the 29 years since this case happened, do you know whether any arrests were made? Well, as you well know, there is some subtlety in this case. Although the ligature and petechia were quite obvious and seemed to scream, like the ransom note, that something obvious had happened to JonBenet. Well, something else had also happened to JonBenet that wasn't obvious. And on the one hand, you have the head injury that wasn't so obvious, but there was also another injury that was even less obvious. And I think if the doctor hadn't been blinded by the obvious, and perhaps if it wasn't Christmas night or the night after, he may have been in less of a hurry, and he may, if it wasn't a holiday, he may have been sort of more available. But, if he'd lingered longer and thought critically, he might have noticed some symptoms, some sign of this head trauma. If there's anyone that could do it, it's a coroner. He may have noticed, for example, blood in JonBenet's nostrils. He may have spent a little more time inspecting her ears and her face and her mouth, and he may have noticed the massive subcutaneous contusion. Maybe if he just placed his hand over her head and just done that sort of thing. And, if he had noticed this, there may have been an interest there and then to search for an alternative murder weapon than the one that is around her neck, and to look into the minutiae of the case more closely, like right there, right in the house. And so it raises a couple of questions. Did Mayer ever go into the basement where JonBenet was found? Did he go into the little girl's bedroom? Did he see the poop-smeared box of candy under the Christmas tree in her room? Did he see the pajama bottoms in the bathroom? So even when he performed the autopsy, he only noticed the skull fracture very late. Why? Because there's a fair amount of subtlety in this case. Number 4, time of death. Can I just say, for me, time of death is one of the most important aspects an investigator needs to sort of implement and test and find out. It's not one of the easiest aspects either. It's arguably one of the hardest. I sometimes refer to it as one of the 5 pillars of true crime. And it's arguably the most important pillar in any investigation. It's also vastly underestimated and underutilized. You don't hear about this as often as you should. In this case, imagine if time of death was determined to be 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. the previous night. What would the implications of that be? Well, it would very strongly implicate a family member because they were still awake at that time. And they said they were. The scream Melody Stanton heard could theoretically also be verified by determining time of death, or indeed discounted. I also think the later the time of death in this case, the more it tends to exclude the parents, and the more likely an intruder or some other unknown individual enters the odds. Now, although it was good of the doctor to wear booties and whatnot, I'm afraid the Ramsey crime scene, including JonBenet herself, was massively compromised by the time that he got there. So something that I'm a little bit critical about is that the doctor didn't try and establish time of death, incidentally lully. And that's not to say even if the doctor had tried to ascertain that in situ, whether he'd be able to answer that question, especially because he arrived at the scene so late. So think about the 2 additional details awaiting the doctor's assessment. A, time of death, tough to deal with in that situation. And then B, the SA aspect. Both of these are very subtle. Digestion rates and statistical inference at the autopsy level could help determine the one. There are various things that you can do. Measure the temperature, extract eye fluid, all that sort of thing. Of course, there were things he couldn't do in situ, such as study the semi-digested pineapple. That would only be possible at an autopsy study. While the essay narrative, that was going to require very careful, very meticulous study because of its subtlety, and perhaps even consultation with other doctors. We will get to that. Now, to Mayer's credit, he did precisely this. And the part in Arndt's report that deals with this is unfortunately a little hinky. If you look closely, after page 34, I'll put a link to that whole report in the description. You can see it for yourself. After page 34, it's annotated at the bottom right, it jumps to page 121, otherwise annotated at the top as page 8. And so what we have here, the narrative pages are incomplete at this critical point. They are interrupted. But it is at this critical juncture that Arndt refers to Dr. Sirotnak. And so that brings us to number 5. Who is Dr. Sirotnak? According to Arndt's report regarding Dr. May invited Dr. Sirotnak to, but it wasn't just a second opinion on the whole autopsy. It was specific to the trauma in this intimate area of JonBenet's body. And so Arndt lets us know that Dr. Sirotnak did conduct an examination on JonBenet after the conclusion of a particular meeting. And then that's it. We don't really hear from him after that in this report. So who is he? Well, let's have a look. Dr. Andy Sirotnak was chief of Denver Children's Hospital Child Protection Team. What do you think they investigated? And so Mayer consulted him for a second opinion. And this was regarding injuries Mayer observed in an intimate area of JonBenet. And so if Dr. Mayer was rash, and if he was hurrying, and if he was perhaps not spending as much time initially, and you could argue maybe he was, but certainly at this point he has slowed down a great deal and is even second-guessing himself, and he wants to be careful and he wants to be clear on what exactly is happening here. And we are going to deal with Sirotnak and actually 4 more doctors and getting their second opinions on the essay narrative in the next analysis.
Whether the boy is a suspect, investigators won't comment, saying only that right now, this murder investigation is wide open. In Boulder, Phil Keating, 9 News.
I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening. Look out for my next video on the Gabby Petito case, and I'll see you guys next time.